live now.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to the Rushcliffe Borough Council's Corporate Overview Group meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is as usual being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information, England, Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to switch on your microphones when you are not, switch off your microphones rather, when you are not speaking, and to switch them on when you are speaking, because that directs the camera. Can I also make sure that everybody's switched their phones off? May I introduce those who are also attending? We have Charlotte Caven-Attack, he's our Service Manager for Corporate Services, Ed Palmer, Communications and Customer Services Manager, Katie Brennan, Senior Finance Business Partner, and Emma Richardson, Democratic Service Officer. I'll now move to the first item on the agenda, and I have to remind everybody this is a very full agenda, so can we be as precise and concise in presentations and in scrutiny. Apologies for absence. I believe we have Councillor Gareth Williams. Any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the last meeting. I don't intend to read through them, but has anybody any issues with the minutes of the last meeting? Can I therefore take that as unanimous? Thank you. So we now move on to the Finance Performance Management Report, which will be presented by Katie. And I believe you also presented us with a new Appendix D.
I have, yes. Apologies for the error in Appendix D. So I will keep this as brief as I can. So I'm just going to give you the highlights of the report, because obviously you will have had a chance to read this. So summary of the financial position. For revenue, the projected outturn for revenue has worsened since last quarter. So we were reporting an underspend of 0.55 million, and that's now 0.287 million. Mainly, this is due to the crematorium. So we have a review has taken place at the halfway point, and the projection for the second half of the year is based on the current performance, and that gives us 310,000 less than budget. Other large movement is in planning. There's been a reduction in the demand from new development, so this has led to 259,000 under recovery of income. They are offset by a reduction in utilities projections. So when we set the budgets for 23-24 utilities, it was at the height of the uncertainty, and we did set a pessimistic budget to ensure that the council was protected. So we have been able to release some of that now, 183,000. So the saving is proposed to be used for future year pressures, pay, inflation, etc. The capital underspend has increased from 6.457 to 9.292 million, and in the report there is a request to rephase 7.068 million of this, which leaves 2.224 million, the majority of which is 1.2 million underspend on the crematorium, but the final account's not yet been agreed, so we can't release any savings at the moment. And that's the main summary of the report. Are there any questions?
Has anybody any questions with regard to the report? Councillor Gowland? It may have seemed flippant, it really isn't meant to be flippant. It said in one of the reports that the use of the crematorium, in fact crematoria across the whole of the region or borough, had fallen. I forgot to ask. I mean, how does that be? I mean, I could imagine there may be a reason to do with COVID, but
yeah. So obviously, it's very difficult to predict death rate, and it is also seasonal. So we would expect that demand is less over the summer months, unfortunately. But as you say, COVID has also caused a factor in the people who may have been dying may have died earlier due to the COVID pandemic. So that's as much of an explanation as we're able to offer.
Councillor Plant, could you put your microphone on?
So I'm not clear. So I sent questions in. Am I asking them now, or is that will they get written results?
Did you receive the questions from Councillor Plant?
Oh, well, I haven't actually got that because I sent them to you. But certainly one, I know one was the fact that on Rushcliffe Oaks that there was 60,000 for grounds maintenance or something, and I wondered why that wasn't included in the
That was also a question that I put forward as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. So yes, at the time of budget setting, it was considered, but it was thought at the time that it would be able to be contained within the streetwise existing resources. Obviously, we've had two things happen. Streetwise have come back in house. The crematorium's a new project, so we've got limited experience in that area. So now that Streetwise is back in and the crematorium is up and running, we're more able to understand the needs of the grounds maintenance. So specifically around staffing, we've had another half FTE that we've had to put into the resource, and also it's more expertise because of the development of the grounds than other GMP operatives, so attracts a higher rate. Equipment and additional materials to respond to issues arising. Obviously, it's really important that the crematorium is of a good standard, so you know it's sort of not something that we can avoid doing. However, Rhonda's working with Streetwise to look at ways that we can cut costs and still deliver an efficient service, and the future years will be built into the budget setting process, which you obviously you'll be involved in at a later date.
Councillor Gowland. Thank you. The underspend on registered housing providers, obviously it's concerning when there's a shortage of housing in the area. I don't need to tell you that. I just wondered how it's come to be an underspend and whether there's plans in place for next year to try and avoid the same thing happening.
So this is a question that comes around a lot, isn't it, in these meetings, and understandably so, because it's large variances and large amounts of money. So what I'm going to direct, if it's okay, to a report that went to the community scrutiny group, which was on the 5th of October. So there's a report on social housing, and paragraph 4.10 onwards talks about the affordable housing budget. So it gives you a breakdown of where the balances come from. It talks about the reasons why it's difficult for us to allocate the capital, which is a lot about around land and that kind of thing, opportunities and strategy, and then a bit of work on the different housing needs. So that's a good read, and more information than I could give you because it's not my specialist area.
Yeah. Councillor Edderby.
Sorry, I didn't submit my questions ahead. So more of an observation really, but on Rushcliffe Oaks, I've sort of spoken to people. Obviously, the targets were possibly set too high. I must admit, from memory, I thought we'd gone for a slow start and building it up, but that's water under the bridge. I think it's been discussed by communities scrutiny group, but just as an, if you like, talking to people. I know we've done a lot of work with funeral directors, but actually people in the public don't seem to are not as aware perhaps as they should be, and I think maybe we should be doing more marketing of the fact that it's there. It's just an observation. And I guess the other question was on Streetwise. It's a bit concerning to see that sort of size of an overspend on Streetwise, because bringing it in-house was supposed to save us money. So how does that sit against that target?
Yeah, sorry. Didn't work then. Okay, so the main issue with Streetwise is around the vehicle hire. So it was more the strategy of when Streetwise was outside that they would hire vehicles. So we're looking to purchase rather than hire vehicles. However, some are still under contract, so we still have to do those. We've just recently, actually, I've got a date here somewhere. So the cleansing fleet's now been purchased, so we're not hiring those anymore, and that's as of the 1st of October. So that actually saves us 8k a month in comparison to hiring. So it will come down, and you know, as the other vehicles that are still on contract start to come to the end of theirs, then we'll look to do the same with that. But unfortunately, we have to honour those contracts.
Mr. Palmer, do you want to come back on?
Yeah, good evening. Just on the communications point of view as well, it's very much on our radar. We've completely coincidentally got a video on our YouTube channel tomorrow morning on Maisie the Comfort Dog, who is one of Rushcliffe Oaks. I think it's one of the only ones in the country where you can go into a crematorium and actually meet a comfort dog, for example. That's the sort of news item, the sort of angles we're looking at to try and garner fresh and new content and focus on it. That said, and I'm only paraphrasing what I'm sure Rhonda Churchill, the manager at Oaks, would say, so much of the work goes on with the funeral directors of trying to work with them over time to build up the reputation of it. And I think that's where the vast majority of inquiries and interest in the site would come. But you're absolutely right. This is why we're looking at doing wider news items, things that actually engage a lot of the local population. So yeah, there'll be more of that soon.
Thank you. Councillor Plant.
Yes. Appendix B was Development Corporation. Final payment made. Remaining budget 99,000. Not required. So the question was, how much has Rushcliffe paid in total to the Development Corporation, and what's it for, and will payment be required going forward? Yeah, thanks. Oh, no, done that one. Yes, just a general point I'd like to make in the fact that there's an awful lot of acronyms in these reports, and you know, most of which I either Google or work out, but there are some that I'm a bit baffled by. So it would be was certainly was one. Hog and Lad 3 local authority delivery green energy grants 161k to support decommissioning of BLC. Sorry, what does that mean? Was my question.
We have leisure centre.
That's one thing. Oh, and what are Hugs and Lad 3s?
1 second, because I did expand these out on last month's report.
Oh, right.
Because I also asked these same questions. So let me see if I can find it.
Or if you want to send me that will, you know.
So no, it's home upgrade grant is the Hugs.
Yes.
And the Lads are the local authority delivery grants.
Right. So if I sort of wanted to know how they were used,
I can find out for
could
you.
Yeah, thank you. That would be really helpful. And I will leave this as the last one, and because I mean this has been going around since years ago when I first came on the council. Traveller site, rephrased to 24/5. A call for sites in borough will soon be requested in the borough. When will that take place? And my big question is, when that does come into effect, will that actually be a permanent site for travellers who wish to be permanently there, or one where travellers come to be in transit? Because that, I keep saying, is the big issue. Every year, somewhere in Bridgeford, obviously travellers appear, which costs a lot of money, moving them on. And my view is they'd be better if there was a transit camp that they could go to, and then, because they are moving on, they're going somewhere else. They're on the way up to Appleby or somewhere like that, probably. So I just wanted, if there's any more detail on what's happening there. Thank you.
It's my understanding that we've not yet managed to secure a site. Yeah, so it's difficult to say from that point of view. I do think it was more for permanent. So I'm not sure about transient. But again, I can ask that question for you.
I was going to highlight the traveller site thing, and it was more. We did discuss it a bit at the last meeting, actually, and it was, and it is. We need a permanent site in the borough, and obviously, as long as we haven't got one, there is a risk that someone could create a permanent site and win it at an appeal. So, I won't use an example of where it might be, but. So the fact that it's being delayed, that in itself, I've just wanted to highlight that in itself creates a risk as well, which we should be aware of.
Yeah, totally. And I do know it is high on the list of priorities. You know, it's a high risk item.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. One was just going back to the hired vehicles. So I read something, I think that's another question. There's not a plan for Rushcliffe to hire out the vehicles, is there? That was maybe how it read to me. It's only a plan to stop hiring vehicles in. Yeah, okay, thanks. Can I just ask about special expenses, Appendix C? So, well, actually, under Appendix D, it says the Abbey Circus fencing is a special expense. And presumably that comes under the West Bridgewood Parks on this document. How is this decided? And can I also ask what are annuity charges for West Bridgewood, please? That might just be my ignorance.
So the first point was the Abbey Road fencing. Did you say that was in Appendix C?
Yeah, when I mentioned Appendix B is a special expense.
Appendix D.
Appendix D is a special expense.
So Appendix D is capital spend. Appendix C is purely revenue. So you
Okay.
won't see that within
Okay,
that
so
same report.
in that case, the question applies to both, really. How is it decided? And secondly, what are annuity charges? Sorry.
Okay, yeah.
Question.
There is a special expenses board. Discuss which. Okay, all capital programmes will have gone through the budget process. So when the budget was presented last February, I believe, all the capital appraisals would have been in there.
Okay.
And it would have been included as part of that.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask what annuity is too?
Yeah, the annuity charges is a charge that we make every year for those facilities to recognise that as a cost. I'm not 100% sure because I don't calculate that, so I would have to check that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for those questions. I've just got a couple. I notice we've got staff savings due to vacancies, but presumably those disappear when we employ agency staff.
No, they're proper savings.
They're still savings.
They're proper savings.
Agency staff.
Yeah, so I've had a quick look at it for you based on the question you submitted. So we've got, I sort of put a brief list of the areas in the report there. So we've got, for instance, a revenues and benefits officer, which is internally promoted. We're not backfilling into that post. We've got a couple of vacancies in business support, which sometimes what can happen is if people leave, then it can take like a month and a half where we've got nobody in post. And then when we get a new person in post, if the old person's kind of been there for a long time and moved up the scale points, and actually when a new person comes in and
lower scale,
there can be a difference in that. So we've got some of those. In finance, we've got some savings because we've got a vacant role because we've got a sit for trainee in post instead. Planning and growth have actually they had some vacancies in year, but they're now fully established. So they do use agency, but it's within the budget. They've not incurred any additional agency costs above what they planned. So yeah, IT, for instance, they have used agency, but they've had salary savings, so it's just directly one has replaced the other.
Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Savings.
The other one was, it's in Appendix C, Section 106 monies, commitments not yet identified. Do we know why and when?
Which was happening, sorry?
It's in Appendix C, and it's Section 106 monies under the analysis.
I'm just having trouble finding that one.
It's page 27.
Okay, yeah, so some of that's linked to the affordable housing that we've already talked about as well. So there's that, and also I think there was some which was going towards Bingham Leisure Centre as well, and that was delayed. Yes, I can see if I've got, yeah, so the original use was for Bingham Marina, support for the registered housing providers, Cotgrave Leisure Centre, Keyworth Leisure Centre and Greythorn Drive play area. So as you'll see in the report, we're rephasing some of these, most significantly Bingham Marina, and support for the registered housing providers. So obviously that money is linked to that and goes along with it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in one of the performance indicators, which is the percentage of household planning applications processed within target times. I'd be interested to know how the percentages translate into people. It's obviously one of the main ways in which the things that we do impact on people's lives, and these are likely to be people who want to get on with undertaking improvements to their properties, and the delays that may be incurred here could be impactful sort of financially and also in terms of their lives. So yeah, that 29.2% of people whose currently applications aren't being dealt with in the time, I'd like to know it, not now, but it would be helpful to know how many people is that, and also something you could show us about how much longer than the target time we're missing. So are we missing it a bit, or are we missing it by loads? Because those impacts that I've talked about will be felt for shorter or longer depending on the answer to that. And I think I've kind of got a linked question. I think I'm right in saying I've heard before that the planning department is fully staffed in terms of who we think we need. And do these numbers support that view? I.e., is the headcount right in terms of being able to meet the targets we've identified?
Just go back to on both points. I'll come back, Councillor Walker, on both and get a more detailed answer on both. I certainly think it's, as ever with these things, the length and complexity of certain applications can play a part. Don't get me wrong, in terms of obviously, as you said, fully staffed, you'd hope that we are going to be hitting target a lot closer to what it should be. But I'll get the reasons as to why it's where it is at the moment.
Sorry about that. I think we scrutinised that fairly well, and we have some questions we wish to take forward, and hopefully we should be receiving some answers. So can I have a vote on the recommendation? All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried then. So we now move to the annual customer feedback report, and I believe you're going to give that one, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Customer feedback. So for those who've been on the group before, annual report, and this is looking at the complaints the council receives about the services that it delivers, as well as the compliments on the basis of the packed agenda we have this evening, I'm not planning to go through the report in any great detail, other than to say that there isn't anything that we find alarming in this. In fact, things are relatively steady and stable. There are two issues that I just wanted to bring your attention to, which was, as we've already said, with the turnover of staff in the planning team over the last few years. We did have an issue at one point with the number of complaints for the planning team that was associated with that. We did undertake some further training with them about how to investigate complaints, how to avoid them happening in the first place, but how to respond to them and such like, and that issue appears to have been addressed. The one complaint that went to the local government ombudsman that is referred to in the report was also a planning matter, and the council was found to be at fault, which is very unusual for us. But we issued a letter of apology to the complainant and paid £200 in compensation to them as well. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the content of that report.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I'm sure you had the opportunity to look through it when you received it. Oh, Councillor Walker.
It's not a question. It's a comment really, and I think what this myriad of data tells us is that the performance of our council on the whole is excellent. So well done. I think at paragraph 4.4, justified complaints, you know, it can get a bit boring with the lies, damn lies and statistics, but you know, actually the number of complaints isn't slightly higher. That were justified. It's the same. That's the real number that's relevant, isn't it? So I'll pipe down, but well done, everybody.
Right, I absolutely agree with that, and I think yes, we are performing well and we are being appreciated. So can I take it therefore that we have scrutinised that report and we have no further questions, and therefore we're all in favour? Thank you. Right, well, we move on then to item 5, which is the corporate strategy, and that's a report from the Director of Finance.
That's me again.
Oh, it's you again.
It's me again, yes, sorry. I suspect that Ed and Katie may well make their leave and go, which is fine. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you both if you're leaving us. Thank you.
The corporate strategy came to you a couple of months ago in its very draft form. We looked at the public consultation that had been done on the key areas that we had identified within the council. We then opened it up based on the strategic tasks that officers and cabinet had identified, but it was opened up for consultation with councillors. So this report contains the feedback that we received from them and also presents you with what we believe to be the near final version of the corporate strategy for you to discuss and technically recommend to cabinet, though as you will have noticed the cabinet papers came out yesterday. So it's on the agenda for cabinet next week and we'll be going forward from there to council at the beginning of December. I know that there are a few questions that have been submitted and I'm happy to respond to those.
Councillor Plump.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a bit of a problem with the recommendation, really, because it's recommended the corporate overview considers the result of the councillor's consultation. Well, in terms of what, you know, the response to the councillor's consultation, it says at point 1.3, the results of the councillor's consultation are presented within the report. Well, they're not. And obviously the recommendation is to consider the results of the councillor's consultation. It mentions the numbers, there was 4, and obviously a political group, which obviously was us. But I just don't see how it's valid that we can consider the result of the council's consultation when we haven't seen anything from it. In the draft one that we had previously, the response from residents is actually highlighted and listed, which is fair enough, great. But to me, that doesn't seem to be relevant to the recommendation. And I think, as you mentioned, Charlotte, that the fact that cabinet has already, it's gone to cabinet anyway. The actual corporate strategy, it's the optics aren't good really. In terms of, you could have, I know they're supposed to be a week beforehand, but you could have perhaps waited until after this meeting before the cabinet paper went out. But anyway, I really can't see that A is could be valid really in terms of this report.
Thank you, Councillor Plant. I have to say, I was somewhat concerned when I saw it had gone to cabinet, and I thought, this is odd because it hasn't come to scrutiny yet. So I thought, well, maybe it will go to cabinet, and it might be that we have not approved it. So it might just be that it's there as an item on the agenda. But I agree with what Councillor Plant has said. Perception is not good. Councillor Edderby.
Oh, sorry.
Bearing in mind what's been said, I do believe we could make a recommendation and ask the cabinet to consider it. Is that, even though it's obviously their papers are published, but things can be changed on the cabinet agenda if we chose to make a recommendation as a scrutiny group. So, whilst you've both expressed the opinion, that doesn't mean to say we can't say something about it.
I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's very much a case of, it's a technicality that the papers were published yesterday. It's on the agenda so that it gives people the maximum amount of time to have a look at things. In the cabinet report, it makes it very clear that it is coming to COG tonight to be considered, and that any changes that you wish to make will be updated verbally in the meeting. So it doesn't by any way mean that what you say tonight doesn't get taken into account. Also bearing in mind that what you say tonight has an impact. We've got a month now before council. There is plenty of time for us to make any changes based on what you feel needs to be incorporated this evening. So I wouldn't worry about the technicality of the timescales. It's still a draft document. It's still a draft document when it comes out of cabinet. It is only after that point that it gets finalised and put forward for council, and it's only after council that it's finalised and we seal the door. No more changes.
Thank you. But it is perception, which is the problem here. What about the rest of Councillor Plant's question with regard to consultation?
I think it's a very well made point. Thank you very much. I would agree with that, and it's up to you whether you feel that you want to vote on that or strike it from the record. I don't think it's fundamental to whether it goes through or not. But yeah, fair point. It doesn't have the level of detail in, and to be honest, having seen the consultation responses, I don't think they could have been summarised in the way that the residents' consultation responses were, because it was such a small number of fairly detailed comments. And you'll see from later in the report, they haven't made a fundamental difference to the content of the corporate strategy, but they have been circulated to officers, and those officers responsible for delivering the task have got them in mind and will take them into account. So I think it's more a case of how much detail was appropriate to bring forward. But I don't have a problem with you just putting a line through that one and saying we don't agree.
I think we could just certainly delete A. I'd put that forward. Do I have a second?
A second. So you'd like to see it struck properly.
I was quite surprised when I read this that 4.6 says there were only 4 responses. Is that the total from the council members, just 4 responses?
Yes, 4 responses were received. One of those was a response from a political party rather than an individual councillor.
Find it a bit surprising. I'm sure I responded, and I apologise if I didn't. Did the fact that it came from one of those responses came from a group, has that had any influence on skewing the
results, opinions that have been put forward?
No, it hasn't. So the results that came through were all anonymous. So I don't know who responded, other than the fact that it's easy to see from one set of responses that they refer to themselves as a political party. So therefore we can say that that's a group response. As I just mentioned, the comments that came back were very, very detailed and at an operational level. So instead of changing the content of the corporate strategy, they're just being taken into account in the delivery of the tasks. So there wasn't anything fundamental there that would change the tasks that had already been put into the corporate strategy. So therefore it hasn't skewed anything that was in there.
So moving forward to when, well, this won't happen again for another 4 years, but is there any way that we can encourage councillors to actually respond to these things?
You tell me. It's been out there, they were emailed, it was mentioned here that we were going to have a consultation, it was in councillors' connections, leading horse to water can't make it drink. The opportunity was there for councillors to respond. The fact that so many have chosen not to is not something that I can control.
Absolutely. Councillor Gowland. Councillor Plant, could you... Thank you. It's turning to the actual content and actually following up on one of our consultation points. We asked about hybrid working, and I wonder whether it's sort of remiss, or not, maybe a bit of a strong word at this stage, to not talk about working patterns in here and how staff are expected to work in the future or want to work in the future, whatever the correct terminology is. Have you got anything on staff development and staff working practices for the future?
It's very much a case of the working patterns of staff are under the remit of the head of paid service and therefore considered to be an operational issue. The corporate strategy is very much an external focused. How do we make an impact on the community? Where can we make change? How can we make change in the borough? How can we make the borough a better place to be? The pattern of staff working isn't considered to feature in the corporate strategy at all.
Thanks. I know at county level it has impacted on residents because they're, for various reasons, particularly because they're often dealing with difficult issues, the time that residents can contact staff is reduced because their staff are isolated because they're not in the office. So is there any impact on the residents if staff are not in the office in terms of answering phones and things like that?
Absolutely no impact whatsoever, and neither should there be. Our staff, since the very beginning of COVID, have been totally capable of doing exactly the same job at home or in a coffee shop or in a meeting room or remote location as they are in the office.
So if they get an abusive phone call from a resident about their council tax billing and, you know, unable to sort out emails and letters with respect to that, they're okay at home, they're not isolated. This is the sort of thing I'm thinking about. It works both ways.
So under those particular circumstances, and thankfully those are very rare for us, we have support systems in place. So with Microsoft Teams, even if you're in the middle of a phone call, most teams have a group chat which is going on in the background right the way through the day. So it simulates the office environment. So it would be beholden upon somebody who's in an uncomfortable situation like that just to flag it up. Somebody else can then keep an eye on the conversation, make sure they're okay, phone them afterwards, offer to take the phone call and such like. So staff are given training on how to deal with that type of interaction, and it doesn't make any difference whether they're at home or in the office.
Councillor Way.
Just a point of clarity of something that was in the corporate strategy. Can you tell me what the 5 leisure centres are that are mentioned, please?
Certainly. Borough Council has this: Rushcliffe Arena, Brigham Arena, Cockgrave Leisure Centre, Keyworth Leisure Centre and Eastleigh Leisure Centre. 5.
I was concerned whether Eastleigh was included in that because it will come into the remit of Borough Council, as I understand it, within the lifespan of this strategy.
Eastleigh Leisure Centre has always been considered one of Rushcliffe's leisure centre, whether it was built under the PFI contract or not. But you're quite right, and I think it's the beginning of 2027 that it comes back into the Borough Council's control. PFI is finished. The terms of that handover are very, very clear and were written 25 years ago when that contract was set up, as in it will be transferred back into Borough Council control in the same condition that it was given over in. So I know that there is some concern about the maintenance of the building and the facilities up there, but that is all taken into account. So I think the question was about whether or not there would be a big financial impact of receiving that asset back into the council's asset, and there will not be.
As you say, there could be a financial implication, because I think it's Cotgrave and Keyworth are mentioned as having upgrading, and one hopes that there might be something similar for the Eastleigh when the time comes.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of sort of considering or comment on the actual content of this, what I think I would like to say is around some of the wording of the I don't know what you call them, the targets, if you like. The ones which I think we ought to be more comfortable with are verbs like implement and deliver. The ones I think we ought to be a little bit more cautious of are ones that involve support something, or in particularly be an active partner in the delivery of the East Midlands devolution deal. When we kind of break that down and I look at the action plan, the measures of success there are that we've had a clear and recognisable involvement in its development, and there's evidence that we're benefiting from it. I think I recognise the sort of difficulties involved here, and I also recognise, there are things that we might quite probably want to do. I perhaps would ask if this, it sounds like it is going to the Cabinet in one way or another. I think I would ask them to reflect on whether we've got the drafting and the wording right here. We can probably all foresee some difficulties in nailing this particular bit of jelly to the wall. Not saying it's easy, but perhaps there's a bit more that we could or should be doing to really nail those ones that are a bit nebulous with the drafting.
I'm really impressed that you picked up on it. I love the analogy of the jelly on the wall, because that's exactly what it's like. So the wording has been chosen very, very specifically to differentiate between those tasks which are in the Borough Council's control to deliver, and those where we are an influencing partner, but actually delivering the task is not within our control. And I have a particular issue with this, because in terms of reporting over the next 4 years, I have an absolute nightmare, because as you have pointed out, it's really difficult to be able to identify what our impact could be, what our influence would be, how might we know whether we've done it or not. But those tasks are big tasks. They're very complex, they're very difficult to deliver, they are very important to the borough, which is why they are in the corporate strategy, so that we can keep an eye on them. The proviso, the caveat being, is that we are not in control of delivering them. So there is a limit to what we can do, which is why the language is, as you've pointed out, just that little bit jelly-like.
Councillor Walker, do you have a suggestion for altered wording?
That's the easiest question I've been asked today, Chair. No. you know, all I would say, I don't take issue with that, and probably if we swapped chairs, you would have asked the same question, and I would have given the same answer. I do get, you know, like I said, I think I get that. All I'm doing is suggesting that I'm not saying the cabinet haven't thought carefully about it. All I'm suggesting is that they, you know, have another thing, given what we agree on, which is, you know, these are really important things for the borough. All agreed. Also agreed that the actual delivery is out of our control. So what exactly is it that we are saying that we want to do? You know, is it even what, you know, if we can't, what can we control? And, you know, is that, so I'm asking them to have another think about it. Start with a clean sheet of paper and decide, is this the right wording? Sorry, not to be more constructive or helpful, but I would perhaps say, I think that's their job to do that.
Right. Well, Councillor Garland.
Actually, I think that's a really good point. But the next measure of success is evidence that Rushcliffe is benefiting from the combined authority, which maybe would be enough, wouldn't it? Just to say that we're benefiting. The only question I have about that is, does that mean Rushcliffe Borough Council or the residents of Rushcliffe? Because I could well imagine that where it would be pointless authority if the residents of Rushcliffe aren't benefiting from it. But does that mean RBC in that point? This is on, well, it's the point after the one that's just read. Councillor Adavine.
As a comment on that, I think it always has to be the residents of Rushcliffe who are the beneficiaries.
Yeah.
You know, and I certainly would have got that from the report. It's not the council benefiting from the combined authority. One of the big problems with the combined authority, it's here whether you like it or not, and it is concerning. It was always a concern that the lower tier authorities would not have a big enough say, and indeed, you know, we are already not on. You know, we're not one of the authorities being represented at this point in time because of the political makeup across Nottinghamshire. So our ability to influence is always going to be diminished, and that is a concern. But it's ultimately comes back to the second measure, which is that how can you measure the benefits to the borough?
Councillor Garland.
So, yeah, you're right. So in that case, shouldn't it be that the actions of the council have made the benefits to the residents of Rushcliffe be greater? That would seem to me. So Rushcliffe Borough Council has interacted with the authority to ensure that the Rushcliffe residents benefit in some way they wouldn't have done if we hadn't been there.
Are you taking note of these words?
My admirable assistant is taking note of the words, but I don't disagree. I think there are still some parts of the action plan that need a little bit of tightening up, so we'll make sure that we take these comments from this evening into account in drafting that final version.
In which event, councillors, can I suggest that the recommendation should say to consider the draft of the corporate strategy, not the final draft of the corporate strategy, which we have been doing, and that we endorse the design of the corporate strategy, and it goes forward to Cabinet for consideration and reflection upon the wording. And perhaps you'll put forward what has been said so that they understand what we mean by that, rather than the recommendations as they sit there. Are we in agreement with that?
So it's just a technical point. Where did we get to with A?
Oh yes, yes. What was the?
My suggestion would be you ignore A
Yes,
And you just have 2 recommendations
Yes.
as outlined by the chairman.
which is, in fact, what I'd done. I hadn't included A, so we just ignore that. Are we?
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, could there just be some feedback back that it would have been helpful to actually see what the councillors had come back with, if you see what I mean, consultation, because they have those 4 and the political group who actually, or I think that includes the political group who did respond. It would be nice also to look at what their thoughts were on the corporate strategy in the future.
Can we take that forward for future?
Because I think that gives a reason as to why that A is just totally irrelevant, really.
Yes. Yep. Right, are we happy with that then, councillors? Good. Right. I'm not switched on, sorry. I have in fact spoken to Councillor Williams, who's not with us tonight. He did make a comment that at his last meeting, he felt officer reports were still just being regurgitated as a presentation. We've had issues with this in the past. And what he felt was they should be expanding upon key points within the reports. And as I have said, if their reports are carefully prepared, there shouldn't be any need to be saying anything else. It should be a matter of answering the questions that we or the committee have for them. I do agree that officers tend to, yes, you can see that they're just repeating what the points are. And that is taking up time. And on that particular meeting, you were really strapped for time. I don't know whether you have anything you wish to add.
No, yes, Councillor Williams very considerately contacted me this evening, but he couldn't make it this evening. And I think, yes, I agree with what he was saying. I think in terms of, I mean, this whole scrutiny system is new to me. It wasn't here when I left, and it certainly wasn't at county when I left either. So that I think the role of the officer is quite crucial to make scrutiny work. And looking back at the community scrutiny group, I mean, I'm looking at mine here. In one of the instances, the officer didn't really answer the questions that were actually on the scrutiny. They gave a very long presentation, but the questions weren't answered that were being asked. Now, that doesn't seem to be the best way of scrutinising, really. And I think also with council, we both agreed that the presentation when an outside, it's not always appropriate, and it's not always, I know, person came in about the Canal and Rivers Trust. It was really a very useful scrutiny session, without a doubt. So, well, just agreeing with what he's saying, really. But I think, again, you're absolutely right that just going through the report is not what we want, really. We can we've done that, we've read it, we can ask questions, but I think it is I think it's really important that they actually look at what's being asked on that matrix, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Councillor Walker.
Before me. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Andy.
I need eyes this way.
I don't disagree with the general thrust of that. I think there are elements here of fact and degree. So my mind goes back to a presentation that we had at the Growth and Development group recently from Paul Phillips about the biodiversity net gain assessment consideration, all of that. And that was so new and technical that I really don't think a report straight into questions would have worked, because we all needed that explanation. And one of the reasons it was so memorable is Paul did such a fantastic job of explaining it to us. So I think we ought to just bear in mind that it's not easy to know, is it, before? But I think we ought to, whilst not disagreeing, we ought to acknowledge that there are some items where you probably do need the committee would benefit from the presentation being presented and gone through in that way. I think it's good practice for the scrutiny matrix to be added to the reports to the committee, which does focus on, focus attention on the point that Councillor Plant raises, that, well, if you read the report and you read the scrutiny matrix, then, we ought to be asking questions in advance about if that report doesn't appear to be answering that question or get to the thrust of why it was asked in the first place. And I suppose the third point is, this is where the chair's briefing really comes into its own, doesn't it? Whereby, I think we would hopefully but Councillor Way would be with me, that that's an opportunity for us as the people in those roles to kind of make sure, and if there are things that we think are missing from the report, or do or don't need to be explained, that we're kind of driving that process in advance of the meeting rather than letting it happen at the meeting and worrying about it afterwards.
I think that's where I was saying the expansion on key points within a report is possibly required verbally, and as you said about the Canal and Rivers Trust one, yes, it's probably to pick out those very important bits and expand upon them. But yes, as far as the scrutiny is concerned, if the questions aren't answered, then members need to be saying, excuse me, that question hasn't been answered. Councillor Redvine.
It's just really a thought from Councillor Plant's comment. If you actually go back to this particular scrutiny process and all the groups and how they were set up, one of the things we keep talking about officers being asked questions, but actually if you look at the original scrutiny report, which I think came from the last sort of peer review, as a result of the last peer review, the point was actually made that it wasn't just officers we're scrutinising. We can call in cabinet members, we can, and obviously, so on my scrutiny group, mine's the one that looks backwards and checks what we've been doing, and the others look forwards. But yeah, we do get a lot of outside presentations, and so we can ask a lot of questions of them. But I'm pretty sure I'm still the only person who was ever asked to go into a scrutiny group as a cabinet member. But we can actually do that, and possibly, yeah, obviously there's got to be a reason for it. But I think we need to remember as scrutiny chairs that, part of the scrutiny process is we're not just scrutinising officers, we are scrutinising the whole workings of the council, and that could include cabinet members or external bodies, which obviously we get the point of doing.
Oh, I thought you were indicating. Is everybody in agreement with that? Would you like to?
Just to come back on a couple of those points, the most important one is we don't actually scrutinise officers. We scrutinise service delivery, we scrutinise priorities, we scrutinise tasks. It's just the officers that happen to have that information and come along. It's not meant to feel like a firing squad, and thankfully it doesn't anymore. I have experienced being on the other side of that table, so we do appreciate that that's not necessarily what scrutiny is about. It's not just portfolio holders that we can bring forward. The Constitution will allow you to bring forward expert witnesses of a variety of different kinds, and that's also something to bear in mind. Picking up on the points that were made by a variety of different people about officer reports, hitting the matrices, and also those presentations providing additional value. It's something that we were already very aware of internally, and I have a training session with officers that are likely to be asked to come to scrutiny in the new year that will go through exactly those points. how are we actually looking at hitting the matrices? What content are you putting in your report? It's not actually supposed to be the sum of your entire knowledge. Let's actually just give people what they need to make a decision, and what the purpose of scrutiny should be, how those presentations can actually add value to the meeting. So we've got that in hand, and hopefully there should be improvements over the course of next year.
Thank you. I think what we have to remember is that this scrutiny is an ever-evolving process, and we need to learn from each meeting, not just the whole process, but from each meeting will be something new to learn, and or something we want to drop off and say, no, we don't need that anymore, it's no good. So yes, your feedback is very important at all of these meetings, and yes, that's good to see that the officers are having similar training to ourselves. I do understand that there is, I've written it somewhere else, some possible training which East Midlands councils are giving on scrutiny, and it might be useful if we all made an attempt to attend that, and the officers as well, maybe. Yeah. So, but when I was previously chairman of Corporate Overview Scrutiny, I attended some East Midlands councils networking meetings, and it was very interesting to see how other councils dealt with scrutiny. And I personally think we do it well. Well, certainly a lot better than maybe other councils. But yes, that's all down to you feeding in and giving us being that critical friend. Right, so I think that probably, oh no, I've got to go to the rest of you, haven't I, and ask you to input your information. So if I go to Councillor Edderby.
Okay, just very quickly, at the last meeting, we went through the various internal audits, risk management. Possibly the biggest thing that came out, we have set up a member working group to look at the constitution. And so 2 members of the governance scrutiny group are on that, along with along with the chair of planning, the portfolio holder, and one other. I've slipped my mind at the moment. And so obviously we're looking forward to seeing what they come back with in terms of the member working group in the future. Looking forwards, the next meeting, we're due to discuss the asset management plan, and I notice it's still on the list, but actually that's been pushed back to February and the main reason for that is that there have been changes, particularly in EPC ratings, and it's all to do with what type of energy you use. So if you use electricity that's renewable, then it gives you a good EPC rating, and if you've got oil or gas, then you're that's obviously created an awful lot of extra work in looking at the asset management plan. So we've agreed that we'll put it back to the February meeting. I think that's what I've got to report on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edderby. It doesn't seem 5 minutes since we looked at the Constitution before. It seems to come round very quickly.
It was updates to the Constitution, which is almost an ongoing thing. Yeah. But in particular, there were a lot of changes to the potential changes to the Constitution around planning. And in the first meeting back in June, we had a very long meeting, a lot of which was taken up with constitutional changes. And in hindsight, we really possibly should have actually said, well, there's so much here that we really need to have a member working group, and that was the decision. And that's so it doesn't seem an awful lot, because I think obviously the Constitution is always evolving. It's a document that changes, and so I wasn't surprised, but it's the sheer complexity of the particularly focused on the constitutional changes relating to planning and how the planning process works. So that's why it's coming up.
All right. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not totally sure exactly what nature of the feedback that is most valuable to the group. But so in the absence of that, I'll tell you what we did and what we're going to do next, shall I? So we had a look at an item on how the borough plans makes arrangements for infrastructure relating to growth, which was interesting in and of itself. But I think one of the key takeaways for us was that process happens a bit like the local plan process, with a very looking over a very long period forwards, and it's not easy to adapt and change when things adapt and change. Not quite sure what we can do about it, but there we are. We want to the discussion diverted into members' concerns, often on a local level, about elements of infrastructure that should be in place, or should definitely be in place, or elements of bits of infrastructure that members think should be in place in their area, which haven't, for a variety of reasons, happened. So the item that we've got on the agenda for this meeting later tonight carries on that theme. Effectively, where's my bridge, where's my school, whatever it was, how do those delays happen? And the second item that we considered was a review of growth boards, where I'm slightly surprised to see we were all very much on board with the recommendation to change the focus a little bit towards some delivery boards, which look at the infrastructure, the big projects we've got on, like Fareham or wherever, which have been successful, and move away from some of the current geographical boards to a more sort of task and finish approach, so that I forget the name of the board, but the sort of strategic growth board decides what they think we should be looking at, and they set up something, they go and have a look at that, whatever it may be. High street viability, or that's a bit more reactive, and gets a bit more engagement from the people that we want engagement from. Is there anything that you think that we missed?
No, I don't think so. Just on the growth boards, it was important, I think, to most people that there was a facility to convene a growth board, as you said, task and finish, for particular things that come up in particular areas, and make them much more focused, because I think that was the thing about growth boards before. They very often didn't have a focus, and lots of people came, but they were all looking at different sort of agendas. So the homing in on particular topics and being able to convene them when the local communities, the parish councils and so on, feel that they're necessary. Thank you. I think I've really said what I wanted to say. I think if we can present questions in advance of our group meeting, it does help the officers to have that information to answer you more readily, and does help to speed things up. I know you can't ask all the questions you want to ask, because that's the object of having the meeting, but if you have anything that you can, then it does help. So if we can bear that in mind. I want to just say, you've probably noticed that the scrutiny matrices don't have officer recommendations on them. And the reason behind that was I've had some feedback saying that this is all officer led. Well, I felt that it would be better if we didn't have those on the reports prior to our discussions, but that the recommendations or concerns were verbally imparted. So that's the reason for that. I think that should make for a better discussion. Okay, so as far as that item is concerned, I think we move on, and we now move on to the consideration of the work programme. Now, we have quite a large number of matrices here, and we have actually altered the order that they received in the hope that maybe we can release the attending councillors so that they can go home. But I have a feeling they're all together in one car. No? Oh, right. I'm wrong this time.
2000.
Right, okay. Right. So we'll move to the first matrices, which is presented by Councillor Way. And this is regarding retrospective planning applications. Would you? Oh, what are we doing? How are we doing on time? Yes. So shall we alter it? Yeah.
I think you need to make a decision. Keep it the same.
As we have 9 matrices, I'm going to propose that we shorten the time and that we allow 2 minutes for the presentation and 5 for the discussions, because otherwise we'd be here forever and a day. Councillor Walker's looking a bit.
No,
Oh.
reading too much into my.
You have a very expressive face. I assume you don't play poker. Right, Councillor Way.
It'll cost you 50 quid to find out.
I haven't really got much to add apart from what's in here. I've been involved in a few planning applications recently that are retrospective, and sometimes one wonders if they would have been allowed to go forward if they'd been done the right way around. So I'm interested to know how these are accepted from the planning department and what process they go through when they're looking at it, and how the decisions, I know it goes to planning committee and things, but how they see the decisions made for their recommendations about whether they should be upheld. One of the things I always thought was, if this came straight forward, would it have been allowed? And in some of these cases, I suspect it wouldn't, but because it's already there, it's continued to be allowed. And I'm not sure I quite agree with that. So I would like to hear what the officers have to say. Brief.
That tends to be a question of whether it's considered to be proportionate. And like everything within planning, everything's subjective. I will leave it to councillors. I have some comments, but I'll leave it to councillors to discuss this particular matrices.
Sorry to get hung up on process, but are we going to be advised what the relevant officers' comments to the proposal are, and if so, when?
Well, I think from my point of view, I think you should be discussing whether you think this should go forward.
So I absolutely agree with the sentiment behind it. In fact, I met with a developer this morning at his request, but who's got a retrospective planning application in, which I've objected to, funnily enough. The only thing I'd say about this is it something that, is it just a question that can be asked and get answers to, or is it something that is a scrutiny discussion? And I haven't got the answer to that. But it's an important question, but one way or another it needs to be answered, because I think every councillor has got frustrations about the planning process. I always say to residents, yeah, you can do anything you want without planning permission. It's just a matter of whether it then gets allowed. But there is that view that people who stretch the boundaries and then get retrospective planning permission get away with it. And as a councillor, I think that's an important question that we need an answer to be able to say to residents, it's this or that.
I absolutely agree, and that is exactly my point. That yes, I get retrospective planning applications, and I get an awful lot of upset residents. It is a question, and I think from my point of view, it's a question that can be answered. It's a matter for training, and can possibly be answered by way of a briefing note, because it is a question. It may mean the answer may come back, and you may think to yourself, right, well, okay, we need to scrutinise that, because that doesn't seem to be right. But at the moment, it's just a question that can be answered either through training or by way of briefing. I'll now ask the officers to give their comment.
I think that's exactly what our recommendation would be, is that the scrutiny matrix is seeking information that you do not currently have. That information can be provided either by asking the officers who'd be happy to provide it, or if it's a wider issue and other councillors feel that they would benefit from that, then obviously then it becomes a training issue, and we can make sure that that is provided in the new year as part of the new programme. We do not feel that it's an option for scrutiny, because scrutiny is about there's a problem in performance, in service delivery, our residents aren't happy, whatever that happens to be, we need to fix it. How do we fix it? What are the parameters? Where do we get through? And that's what we need to do. Is there needs to be a tangible outcome at the end of the scrutiny. The tangible outcome here is that you'll be more informed. Well, there's another way of doing that. Scrutiny isn't necessary.
Yes, I felt that's what you would say. I don't see it as although you say it's a question, it's actually a lot of questions. So I don't really see it as a candidate for a briefing note. I'm quite happy that it will be a candidate for a training session, because I think it needs a to and fro of discussion, which you won't get with a briefing note. You will just end up with more questions and sending it back and forth. Face to face is much better, I think.
I would hope that the briefing note would then generate something more, and something would happen further down the line. But yes, I think a training session is probably the better way forward. Right, so I now invite, sorry, Councillor Walker.
I hope you don't mind me weighing in here. I think Councillor Wade's bullet points here. The bottom one, is there scope for improving the system to make it more efficient and effective? I think is a topic for scrutiny. I think the ones above I could go along with that. There's maybe other ways to provide that information. I think Councillor Devine is right that the real issue here for us as councillors is a perception, possibly the reality from residents feeling that there are people out there who game the system, and that perception undermines the system. So it's clearly not for me to kind of necessarily speak on Council Wade's behalf, or look to try to rework this. But whether there's whether it's via training or whether it's via scrutiny, the thing where I feel it would be real value added is I hate myself about to use this phrase, a deep dive into those issues about what the perceptions are about how people gain the system. You know, do those perceptions stand up to, dare I say, scrutiny? If they do, then we need to do something about it. If they don't, then we need to be better equipped and more informed to challenge those. Where if the perceptions are found to be incorrect, then we need to be better equipped to challenge them. So I don't know what I'm really saying, but I think there's something, the underlying key issue here. There is definitely something in worthy of scrutiny, in my humble opinion.
Can I ask that the officers put it to planning for some form of training, if that's possible? And then during that training, we'll be trained in what we do at the moment. And maybe we may say, well, I think there's something here that needs scrutinising because this is not fulfilling what our residents expect. So if we can get this ball rolling, would Councillor Way? Yeah.
I think what Councillor Walker's saying is that we could run a training event and it may not be that well attended, in which case an awful lot of people will be missing out on this. I think with the final bullet point that I've put about improving the system to make it more efficient is, again, it comes from perception, because from perception of me, for example, and this is no criticism of the officers, it's the system, again, as Charlotte was saying, that and then because I see it like that, I find it very difficult to then speak with residents who are saying, why is my next door neighbour allowed to put this in their garden and I can't grow any plants and so on. And I think we need to be equipped to answer those, which again could come from training. But within the training, it's possible we will, like you say, Chair, that we will find a situation where we think, actually, this doesn't seem to be working. And that hence the questions about the proportions that are upheld. And are they upheld because it's the easier option and so on? Because out of the ones that I've commented on recently, I think only one has actually been reversed.
I think there's a lot we need to understand first, and I think that would come from training. But yes, I do think we need to possibly have this deep dive. Councillor Devine,
just from the discussion and looking at the way you've written and your first questions, what you actually want is to quantify it, and I think it would be useful if planning could quantify it, but that should be made available to all councillors. So because we've all had instances that you describe, and as I've said, I've met with someone this morning. So if we can have it, if this doesn't immediately become a scrutiny thing, it could be that we quantify it, we look at if there's a training way around it, and if it's not, and if it's clearly not working, then it can become a scrutiny thing. Does that make sense? But I think the quantification is important. I think
that makes sense. Councillor Gowland.
Can you just remind me, is there a limit on bringing things back? So if we go through this circular process and then we realise we really need Rushcliffe's been doing comms on this, we need to scrutinise Rushcliffe's performance on this, can we bring it, or can Councillor Way bring it back in?
Yeah, there's no reason why it
can't. Well, I was just coming in. It is on the matrix, and it says that has it been addressed in the last 2 years? Now, I've always worked on the basis, if you agree it, if it goes to a scrutiny group, if it gets scrutinised, unless the recommendation of that group is we need more or it needs to come back in 12 months or whatever it might be, that's it, done. And you wouldn't then have another scrutiny matrix and do it again within that 2-year period. If it doesn't actually go, if we go down the route of doing some training, actually the training, we're much better informed now, and now I'm able to work with officers, fleshing out my scrutiny matrix, and it comes back to us again, there is no reason why we shouldn't then accept it for scrutiny.
Yes. I think that is actually quite a good resolve.
In the new year, you're talking about putting it into the next lot of training tranche.
Yeah. Now I think we have Councillor Billings. Who's going to talk about local power generation.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. I'm a complete newbie to this. I'm a first-time councillor, and it's the first time I've ever come across a scrutiny matrix, so I hope I've put it succinctly. My question basically relates to, obviously, energy generation, clean, green energy generation. And I hope you can look further than just the question on the page, because there's a limited amount I can actually put in without giving you reams and reams. How does Rushcliffe Borough Council become the nucleus of a borough-wide urban solar farm? Now, a lot of people get alarmed when they hear the word urban solar farm. They think of, you know, massive amounts of land being covered in solar panels. This is all about rooftop car parks, when I say unused, unproductive from the perspective of energy generation spaces, starting with Rushcliffe Borough Council's assets. So that's all the buildings that are under the council's direct control or influence, car parks and other areas, but widening out to other stakeholders across the entirety of Rushcliffe Borough Council. I'm pretty sure that we're all on board with the fact that, you know, to achieve net zero, we need a massive increase of non-fossil fuel energy. Ratcliffe on Soar is going to close by the end of next year and leave a big hole in the grid's net production. We'll put aside whatever was said in the King's speech about new oil and gas licenses being granted. Even if they do benefit this country, that's not going to be for 10 or 20 years. 2030 is just around the corner. 2040, in, if you like, the sort of almost glacial change that's happening in this country is also just around the corner, and that's too late. If we want to make a real difference, we need to ramp up what is done to provide energy. Why is the wrong question. I would love Rushcliffe Borough Council to be an exemplar and to join the many councils that are already looking at this across the country. There are community energy schemes, there are what do they call them, business innovation districts, etc.
1 minute left.
Okay. I haven't got a lot more to say.
Oh, once that's done.
I hope you'll join me with this, because I don't know the process about scrutiny, etc. I'm hoping that you will allow this to go forward as a piece of work to look at. And it's not for Rushcliffe to become the main driver of this, but to overcome the barriers so that we can help others join in and become an urban solar farm.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, it wasn't.
I didn't want it to make a horrendous noise, so I just paused it.
Oh, right. Thank you. I'm sure we all have a great deal of sympathy with what you're saying. I hope we do, and that we would all like to see this utopia, if I might say. Do councillors have anything they wish to say? Councillor Walker.
I've got a question just for clarity on Councillor Billings' thrust, which is in this second bullet point. What are the barriers to a non-profit social enterprise? Do you mean that what are the barriers to Rushcliffe becoming a not-for-profit social enterprise, or can you just sort of flesh out a bit where you're going with that point?
No, what are the barriers to a not-for-profit social enterprise, community interest company, whatever? in order to achieve a Rushcliffe-wide urban solar farm, there will have to be lots of different entities feeding into the grid that can then be viewed as a Rushcliffe-wide urban solar farm. If we want to avoid greenfield solar farms, we're going to have to put them somewhere. So let's put them on empty roof spaces, let's put them up on top of car parks. So it's not just what are the barriers, how do we find the information to enable all those people that want to join in to overcome the barriers? Not for Rushcliffe to become this not-for-profit entity, but for Rushcliffe to provide the information and become the nucleus to generate the interest and the take-up across Rushcliffe. Hope that makes sense.
So, if I've understood it correct, what are the barriers to Rushcliffe Borough Council facilitating a not-for-profit social enterprise? Right, okay. I just wanted to understand what.
Councillor Plant.
Yes, thank you. You know, I'm fully of supporting on what you're saying, but to me, this is a area for policy rather than for scrutiny, because it's not in place at the moment. So, I mean, I think it's something that I don't know how we can. It's scrutinising something that's not there at the moment. So I don't quite get how we can do that, because it has to be something that presumably the council agrees as a policy that it wants to take on and go forward with. But I mean, as I say, I'm new to scrutiny.
I believe the Borough Council is already investigating its estate as far as energy generation is concerned, and that's within the carbon management plan. The scale of the operation that you're talking about would require operational and entrepreneurial interests, independent businesses, all to come together. And I suggest, or I even assume, that the carbon management planning in March will be looking at how they can facilitate, promote such an idea. But as Councillor Plant has just said, I can't see it something that we can scrutinise yet, because it's not there to scrutinise. Councillor Gallen.
Would it be something that one would normally bring, or might want to bring as a motion, which I think would presumably then turn it into policy, which could then at some time in the future be scrutinised?
Yes. Yes, it could be. You'd have to be very careful about what you're asking, so the wording of the motion. And of course, there's always the very real possibility that it gets turned down, but that would at least get it into the area for some form of debate. I think what you need to look at before you get to that point, by way of advice, is just what exactly is within the role and the remit of the council to do, and perhaps some of the very stark warning stories from other councils who have already been down this route, because I suspect they will be the main objections to what you are bringing forward.
Councillor Billings.
Thank you for that. I presume you're alluding to things like Robin Hood Energy. What I'm not talking about is being an energy seller. Robin Hood bought energy in, sold it on, they never generated it. This is about local generation feeding into the grid for the common good, for the benefit of the commons, not about Rushcliffe being somehow a business that sees energy coming through and being sold on. It's how do we become the nucleus for that explosion of thought and information to get people enthused to actually produce energy locally.
Right. Councillor Edderby.
I think it's an interesting concept, but in some ways we've already made a start, because we've got together with other boroughs in Nottingham, and we do have a supplementary planning document. But of course, the problem with that supplementary planning document is not law, and it's advisory. So it's, you know, we're not going to suddenly make people put solar panels on their roofs when they build a new house. We're basically saying we want them to, but they still don't have to. And obviously, I'm concerned that most of my ward is going to be covered in solar panels at some stage if I'm not careful. And so, yeah, it's something. It's a really important thing. I can't see how scrutiny can deal with it, but it's an important thing that, as a council, we should be looking at what mechanisms we can have to encourage central government to come up with some legislation that actually makes it more of a reality.
Councillor Way.
I think this is somewhere where the Borough Council can use influence rather than anything else. And maybe scrutiny isn't the right place. As you say, we haven't got something to scrutinise, but I think the fact that Councillor Billen has raised this has made it in the public arena for us to discuss now. And I think using our influence wherever we can so that we don't get new warehouses and new schools and new supermarkets without some sort of energy generation, preferably put solar panels on their roofs. I was somewhere yesterday with a vast warehouse and it was covered in solar panels, and I thought this is where we should be going, and all the new stuff that's going up shouldn't just have bare roofs. So I think it's within the sphere of our influence to try and encourage and persuade people to give it a lot of thought, and it will help their business, but also, as Councillor Billen says, it's for the common good. So how we get it into our sphere of influence, I'm not sure, but I think we should try.
Should this not, in point of fact, be considered for the local plan under planning?
As Councillor Edwin's already said, we have supplementary planning guidance, and there is a limit to what can be included in the local plan, but there is certainly measures in place there to do that, but it is about influence. I think that, as you mentioned previously, Chairman, the carbon management plan certainly has tasks in it to be delivered over the next few years that are about the council's estate, from car park canopies such as Gresham, I think we've already done, tops of buildings that we own and such like. And there are also ways of communicating, marketing those projects in a way that encourages businesses and residents to do their bit. The thought of bringing it all together and having a coordinated effort, I think, is a separate task, but it's certainly something that I can raise internally, and that bit of scrutiny that we do in March next year can perhaps make reference to, but it was certainly worth having a look at that when it comes round and seeing how far we already go in our current plans to meet your proposals.
Just one more, because we're running out of time.
One very quick question. You mentioned car park canopy work's already been done. Is that the entire car park or just a little bit of it? Because if it's a little bit of it, I have to say that's not enough.
No.
Off the top of my head, I think it at Gresham is just a small amount. A good example of a whole car park is BGS in Keyworth, which now looks absolutely stunning and works really well. However, the cost of putting that in place is tremendous. It's got to be balanced with what we can afford to do.
One last question, Councillor Gallagher. No? Right, so I think we're all in agreement that this isn't, that it can't go forward to scrutiny as yet. There are other avenues down which it can go. So thank you, Councillor Billings. Councillor Plant, you're wanting clarification on Rushcliffe's local offer for care leavers to be scrutinised.
Well, pretty, I don't want to say a great deal. I think in terms of it's to clarify and to review Rushcliffe's local offer for care leavers. I mean, one of the important issues is I don't think that many members on the council actually know that Rushcliffe has a local offer for care leavers. So there's certainly elements of this that would be training. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, I think, you know, the fact that as a district council, we are also now corporate parents, which is new sort of in terms of legislation, that it is crucial that members do have that knowledge and do have that training in terms of what that will actually means as regards the services that we provide as a district councillor, the council. And you know, I don't think I would be wrong if I did a straw poll and said to anybody here, can you tell me what Rushcliffe's local offer for care leavers is? I don't think I'd have a satisfactory answer. And to be fair, obviously I know about it in terms of being on the county council and being on the children. What is it now? Anyway, I can't even remember. Children's education anyway. So that, and also it has come up. I mean, you know, obviously we are dealing with the most vulnerable group, without a doubt. And the latest figures that I found on the, from the county council was that, in fact, we have 31 care leavers in Rushcliffe. It's not a huge amount, without a doubt. But I think that we need clarity on what that local offer is. I think members need to know what it is. I think it needs to be looked at as to whether it's working, how care leavers know about it, can it be improved? And obviously the final point is the motion that was passed at the last full council, which we supported, saying that care experience is a protected characteristic. Now, you know, passing a motion is quite easy. What does it mean? What does it mean for Rushcliffe? What does it mean for services? And what does it mean for the care leavers that we have in our borough? So I think I've said enough, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Plant. Once again, I'm going to say these are a lot of questions which, if directed to the officers, could be answered. And as you say, maybe it's a question of imparting more information to councillors, and maybe that's a training need. But I don't feel personally there's something there yet to scrutinise. To try and scrutinise it now will actually detract from the motion that was brought at full council. So I think we aren't yet in the position to scrutinise. That is my view.
There is a policy there, though, at present, that there is an offer for care leavers. That is there somewhere in Rushcliffe. So the fact that I've added on the protected characteristics is probably two different issues. But I think it is, you know, it's not one to be, and I can appreciate that obviously perhaps the impact and the effect of that motion is a work in progress. But there is still the local offer for care leavers, which is a policy. It was agreed at Cabinet in 2019. Now, I would like to know, is that working? And it is 4 years, that's 4 years ago. I mean, has it been reviewed? So I appreciate, I can certainly accept the protected characteristic bit, but the fact that there is a policy there that Rushcliffe's had for 4 years that probably very few members know about, and, you know, what impact has it had on, does it have on the care leavers within Rushcliffe? I think that is, there's two separate things there. That,
that's why I think maybe we need a bit of training. Has anybody else anything to add? Councillor Way.
Councillor Plant's quite right. People don't know about it. I had no idea until this was raised at the motion at the council meeting that there were facilities to help care leavers. I was always under the impression they were abandoned, which I thought was horrendous. I'm quite pleased to know that there is something in place. So maybe us finding out about it is a good way to go about it. And then, as you said, with the first matrix, then we decide what there is to scrutinise. So we need to know about it before we can scrutinise it, I think.
Exactly. Councillor Walker?
I'm with Councillor Plant on this one. I think it's pretty straight up and down, classic bit of scrutiny. What's the policy? You know, looking at the bullet point starting at the bottom of page 99. What does the offer consist of? What does it cover? How do we communicate it? Could it be improved? Let's get on with it. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's a solid, straight up piece of scrutiny.
Does anybody else have a comment?
I tend to agree with it.
I'll ask the officer's comment.
Not a foregone conclusion that you're going to go with our recommendation. However, when we consulted with officers who are actually involved in delivering this work, certainly they came back and said actually being involved in any form of scrutiny at this point in time would detract from us delivering the additional items that Councillor Plant put forward as part of the motion. On top of that, and that this is not something I have expected you to know because I didn't know either, but the county council are actually scrutinising the delivery of the care leavers policy across the whole of Notts, and we are participating in their scrutiny review. So therefore, it would seem that if we scrutinised it also within the same time frame, that we would be double-egging it, and that's not a particularly good use of resources. So certainly the officer recommendation at this point was, if you would like information, that's fine, it can be provided about what we do, where the policy is. We can do some marketing communications on that through councillors' connections and such like, but that scrutiny at the moment would actually detract from the important work that was going on.
Councillor Plant? Can you
disagree whether or not what's happening at the county council, obviously, because I'm not on the county council anymore. And I don't know whether there's any timeline involved in that.
sorry.
I don't know what the exact timeline is. I just know that when we talked about it, it's happening now. We're already contributing towards the initial phases of that. So I don't know when it's actually coming to scrutiny, but we know that the work is taking place.
Well, I still think we can. Sorry, no.
I'm thinking about the time spent on the communities scrutiny group, where we've had the waste strategy on the agenda for at least the 5 years that I've been a councillor. So perhaps if members were so minded, we could agree that this item is suitable for scrutiny without necessarily agreeing when that should take place. I don't know where it would go to, but we might look further down, and it could be the best part of a year plus before there's room for the item anyway. So there's just a suggestion about what, yes, when, put it on with the possibility of pushing it back if the time scales with the things that you mentioned. The risk of saying oh no is that by the time it actually comes the right time to do it, we're then waiting another 9 months plus to get it onto the work programme anyway.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Walker. I would, yes, but I think if we do that we should have the training prior, and then we will look at it again and I'll chase up, see what the county are doing. Penny will too.
That would be my feeling, that we need some information. We need to be trained. We need to be given some information. And I've written down here, too soon. I think it is too soon, scrutiny. But that's not dismissing it. And I assume it will go somewhere in your log to say that at some point this needs to be coming back. So if we're happy with
Yeah. What Councillor Walker was suggesting was it went onto the work programme, but sort of further down the list. Is that what you're saying?
well, if that's possible, that's why I'm just saying I think it needs to be logged. But at what point? What I don't want to see is it coming on a work programme and keep being moved, bumped down. It really wants to come back when it's feasible to do it, because it doesn't look good if you keep pushing it down. That's the perception.
I think we can make a note internally that you would like to see it.
Yes.
And in the same way as we will, as officers, quite often just put something on, you know, we know internally that such a policy is up for renewal or something like that. Yes. Certainly, it's a very interesting point. If it's been around since 2019, then it really ought to be renewed if it hasn't been. So it's a case of just keeping it on my radar and making sure that it comes back at some appropriate point in the future, depending on, one, the training, two, the outcome of the county council scrutiny, because ultimately you may well find that when that is published, we actually don't need to do anything. It's already been taken care of. But I think that between those two things, we'll be in a much more informed position, perhaps 12 months down the line.
I accept that the county council will be reviewing it. There is still obviously going to be, a role for the boroughs and the districts in terms of supporting caregivers, simply because of the services that we provide. It's just a matter of what, when, and how.
All right, so if we now move on to the next scrutiny item, which is Councillor Thomas. You've been waiting extremely patiently, I noticed. Hello. And we are going to be talking about parking provision.
Oh, what? Sorry,
I've
got housing density first.
Oh, is it the housing? That's not the. Oh, that's not the order I've got it in. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, right. Sorry, housing. Yeah. Oh, no. How about that? Housing density.
Okay. So housing density is important for a number of reasons, really. Housing density determines how much land you have to take to provide a certain amount of housing, which is critical to the council's planning of its housing allocations and how it's going to meet it going forward. I have studied over the years how this is calculated, and it's not accurate in terms of when the sites come forward, how many they will actually provide in the long term. In some of our sites in East League, in one of them, it's been doubled. The number of houses has been doubled. It upsets residents because, they're told a certain number of houses are going to appear and a lot more come on the next application and so on. And there's no policy in place in Rushcliffe for whether we make the maximum use of land by putting as many houses on it as possible, or if we spread them out so that they've got more space, or if the space is communal, or the space is in gardens, or indeed if there's a difference between how much you cram houses in West Bridgford and how much you space them out, and how that relates to government policy on all these issues. So this one has come to scrutiny before, and was a briefing note. So the briefing note has been produced, and that explains what we do now. And what we do now, in my view, is not what we should be doing, which is why it needs to come to scrutiny again. Which is why I've put more questions this time, rather than just answering the question that said I would like to understand, because actually I understood how they did it before, but I want them to do it differently. So now I've given you a different scrutiny matrix in the hope that it'll come to scrutiny for people to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Do councillors have anything they wish to say, or shall I ask Charlotte?
Can I ask if it's been scrutiny before, rather than having a discussion, are you going to tell us it can't come again anyway? Or because I don't want to have a discussion and then be told that actually
Exactly. That's
we
what
can't have it come to us.
Okay, so it's come to COG. The recommendation from COG based on the scrutiny matrix that was presented at that point was, it's about information. Let's get councillors a briefing note. Briefing note's been prepared and come out, and Councillor Thomas has resubmitted and expanded upon her original scrutiny matrix at this point on the basis of the information contained within that briefing note. So if you decide that yes, it can go forward for scrutiny, that is acceptable, and I will save my recommendation for after your discussion.
I don't know whether councillors were aware, but this was actually discussed at the LDF meeting a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know whether that makes a difference to whether we scrutinise it at this point. Can I ask the officers?
Well, I wasn't at the LDF group. However, I feel it's important. My recommendation would be this isn't scrutiny. This is a planning issue. If it was going to be looked at in any depth whatsoever, it would be going through the LDF group, not through a scrutiny group. And I believe that that's what I said last time as well. The fact that it's been through LDF and has been discussed at LDF is great, because that means that that was the correct thing to say. And that's what I'm repeating.
Yep. And it's currently being researched for a design code and or guide, which was debated. I was only subbing. I've not been there regularly. Councillor Edavine.
I suppose really it's just the fact that Rushcliffe currently provides no policies to control density. We do have policies on garden size and all that sort of thing, which are often ignored, I accept. Or they seem to be often ignored.
Get a retrospective.
And obviously, I absolutely, yeah, there's a lot of questions here that need to be answered. I do think we do have some existing policies, and if they're not working, then we need to know why. But I do actually also agree that it's possibly an LDF thing, and if it's already been discussed. But yeah, we do want some answers to the questions.
Councillor Gowland.
I was at the LDF. I remember the discussion, and I think I was actually late, wasn't I? I don't remember the specific discussion of density. Indirectly, as you say, garden size, but not actually density. I don't know if we can actually, ask the LDF to look at that.
Sorry, was that part of that design guide thing?
Sorry,
at the LDF, was that part of that design guide thing?
it's part of the design guide. The question, of course, was it was going to be a code or a guide, or a combination of both. Councillor Thomas.
I think there's two things really. Garden size is just one aspect of density. What happens is sites come up for housing, and at that point they go into something called a SHLA, which lays out all our housing sites, which we then use to calculate how much land we need to produce housing to meet our 5-year housing fund supply. And that process is so inaccurate and inefficient that it doesn't give useful information for planning infrastructure. It doesn't give useful information for planning numbers. And other councils have policies that say, in which areas what the density will be, and they look at gross density rather than net density. So there's so much work that needs to be done here, and yes, you could put it over to LDF. I couldn't go to the LDF meeting because it was set at very late and short notice for a time that I couldn't make it. But I don't believe I watched the video of that because I think it was available, and I don't believe they covered it in that depth, and certainly not in this aspect of it.
There was an opportunity and I'm not sure whether it's still open, to put your name forward for a local working group.
Was for the design code, I think, Councillor Cumberlack, and the design code is much broader and different in aspects to this very specific aspect that comes down to how well we plan our land for housing. So, you know, I think it's a different issue.
I do agree, because I have to say, I get very upset by what I call the little boxes that don't seem to be particularly well designed at all or considered. What do other councillors feel about it going forward for scrutiny?
I'm trying to process it. This time I am looking confused and quizzical. What is the suggestion here? Have we got have we got the power to mandate for this topic to be considered at an LDF meeting? Is that what's being suggested?
Yes, essentially.
And would Councillor Thomas be happy with that?
Well, it rather depends whether or not I'm there, doesn't it? Because, as I say, the LDF meetings don't have a fixed time, they're not in a schedule, and I couldn't go to the last one, so, you know.
Well, if I might say, but it helps, obviously, if you're there, but if we could get it brought forward to the LDF, as is in your matrix, and you could add, whether verbally or in written form, a further report, would that help? Because it seems to me that our scrutinising, once again, at the moment, is not actually going to achieve anything. Whilst ever it's giving it an airing, it's not going to achieve anything. And it seems to me that the LDF is the right place for it to go if we are able to send it.
Well, unless I'm missing something, Councillor Thomas is saying that she's happy with that on the basis that it's arranged at a time when she can attend. Because clearly the, you know, let's cut to the chase. You know, Councillor Thomas has got some strong views on this, and she wants us to do it differently. So, you know, quite how, whether we could or indeed should try to ensure that that meeting happens at a time when she can go, I think perhaps is a different is a different question. But you know, don't think it would be unreasonable if that's the road that we go down. And it's right, it is an ad hoc committee, and sometimes it's at relatively short notice, sometimes there's more notice. That you know, would request a minimum amount of time of notice period from, you know, when the meeting is called, because we don't want, let me be more direct. We can't get into a situation where we're mandating when meetings can happen according to a particular councillor's diary. That, you know, and Councillor Thomas knows that.
Sure, we could arrange a meeting, a briefing with the chairman for Councillor Thomas beforehand.
Just say that the minute in the corporate overview meeting in June was in relation to the provision of a briefing note. This would enable information to be provided sooner than the item could be programmed into the scrutiny matrix. And the whole point of it was that it would then come back to scrutiny. That's how it was minuted. So there's a briefing note so that it could then be a productive scrutiny item. Okay, so you can refer it to LDF. I'm not a scrutiny meeting either, so it doesn't matter whether I'm there or not. It's whether it's actually looked at. And Rushcliffe develops a policy for this rather than being completely developer-led as it is at present, and really making everybody unhappy.
I do agree with you, but I'm not sure that we would be making the difference you want to see. And I think the LDF are very much more likely to make that difference. I just want to put it where it would be get the best action. Because I do agree. But I'm not sure that we're going to...
One more thing. If it gets buried in the design code, it's going to be buried by what colour bricks we have and a load of other things that is very nothing to do with this.
But where would you have it go in the end?
It needs to be in the core strategy, what our policy is for housing densities in different sorts of sites, in different areas of the borough, and what housing mix we produce in those sites and how that relates to the land use. And it's absolutely fundamental part of the core strategy that has not been considered so to date properly.
Maybe it should be mentioned. Maybe it should be a motion.
Oh. Look, we can kick things back between motions and scrutiny and LDF and whatever. At the end of the day, somebody's got to look at this, and they've got to look at it properly, and we've got to start doing this properly, not doing it in a bad way, a crap way, which is what we do at the moment. And somehow or other, that's got to happen. I don't mind how, but somehow or other, that's got to happen. And okay, I'm quite happy for you to refer it to LDF if it actually goes in a programme for LDF on its own, not with subsumed into the design code where it would be lost in colours of slates on the roof and all sorts of other things. Conservation there, all sorts of other things, all equally important, but this is a piece of work on its own that actually underpins everything that we do in terms of our housing delivery.
I will personally write to the chairman and tell him exactly that. And perhaps I'll copy you in. Councillor Way.
I think this is an exceedingly important issue. It, as you know, one of my pet projects is about management charges and open space on new developments. And this has an impact on that as well, because the more dense they build, the more open space they're left with, and the effect it has on the way people live and the financial aspects as well. And because there's nothing written down that says how this should happen, as Councillor Thomas has said, it becomes developer-led. And I really think we need to have a bit more input into that ourselves. If Councillor Thomas is happy for it to go to LDF, I think that's the place. But I take Councillor Walker's point about we can't arrange meetings around particular councillors. But I would like to say that I consider Councillor Thomas has a degree of expertise in this because she's very knowledgeable and on the detail. So it would be quite short-sighted not to include her in one of these meetings.
As I say, I will personally speak to the chairman and ask that he invite you to the meeting. Right, now. Oh, there it is, it's back to front. No wonder. Right, we remain with you for parking provisions.
Okay, thank you. Parking provision funded by Rushcliffe. This one arose from the council discussion about parking in Bingham, and I think it raised for me various issues about the overall policy for how Rushcliffe supports parking across Rushcliffe. and how it relates to provision from other providers and so on, and how it's spread across the different centres. It seems to me that our parking provision has probably grown like topsies, grown piecemeal, and there's not a policy underpinning it. It's just been, it's happened in different places. And I think it's probably time to look at it holistically to see where there are gaps in parking provision and what Rushcliffe's role is in providing that parking, and actually who pays for it in terms of overall who pays for the parking in all the different centres, so that it's fair and equitable, and all our centres are functioning as best they can with the parking, and Rushcliffe is playing an equal role and an effective role in helping that happen, not just in the parking that Rushcliffe provides, but in considering the overall other parking there is for the centres. I think parking's essential for our local centres because it helps them stay vibrant. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Plant.
Oh, I would certainly support this being an item for scrutiny, without a doubt. It is, I mean, again, if I going back a few years, I mean, it was the case that actually West Bridgeford car parks actually funded the other parks across the borough because they didn't charge in the parts of the borough. I know that's changed now. But I think the whole situation of what goes on in different areas, and also the plan of going forward in terms of any plans needs looking at. Also, how the ticketing takes place and the charges needs looking at, because it feels that it's a bit piecemeal rather than whole borough. And without a doubt, I think these points that Councillor Thomas has mentioned certainly merit a good scrutiny session.
Councillor Gowland.
I agree with that. I've listened to all the previous discussions. This doesn't seem like it's a case of just getting an answer. It's a case of how the decisions are made and what decisions have been made. I mean, we've all got examples of parking enforcement and car parking design and so on and so forth, charging. But it's, how are these decisions are being made within the council? So I think it's scrutiny, not just fact finding. Councillor
Process. Obviously, we do have parking policies. It's discussed in the budgeting process and things like that. But I don't think there's any harm in it being scrutinised so that it can be seen having, a scrutiny item that flushes out all the reasons why there are different policies and because there are good reasons why there's different policies. They're not all right, and it wouldn't. I don't think it shouldn't. It should be something that a scrutiny committee can look at and decide whether actually we do need to make recommendations that things are changed within our parking policy. I think there are parking policies already in existence, but perhaps we lose sight of why and how and what. So yeah.
Councillor Way is nodding.
Councillor Redfern's just said.
Can I ask for your input?
You certainly can. Officers would be recommending that this is not a suitable item for scrutiny at this particular point in time. So the council has an off-street parking strategy. It covers most of the points that Councillor Thomas has raised. The answers are in that document. It's available on the council's website. It was agreed and approved at Cabinet in March of this year. So it's very recently been done. That document, if you read it, will highlight the fact that the approach to car parking is not piecemeal across the borough. It's actually appropriate for the different areas of the borough. It would not be appropriate to charge, for example, the same price in West Bridgeford as you do in Keyworth. because that's not what it's about. It's about making sure that there's a suitable amount of turnover in car parks so that people can park. The other item that I would bring to your attention is actually in the report that I provide you with each time. Paragraph 4.1 says, the corporate overview group is responsible for setting the work programmes for all scrutiny groups based on the Cabinet Forward Plan, blah, 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 blah. And there is a link to the Cabinet Forward Plan in the Appendix 1 of every report that I bring to you. So the off-street car parking strategy prior to March of this year will have been in the Forward Plan, and the appropriate time to scrutinise it, therefore, was before it got approved in March. It's the 3-year document. It'll come round again, but it's important that you're aware of what's on the Forward Plan so that if you feel that pre-decision scrutiny is appropriate, it's done at an appropriate time. I think the other thing to point out at the moment is if you still decide that this needs scrutiny, you are going to be diverting valuable council resources from actually resolving the problem of parking in Bingham, which the council agreed was something that needed to be done at the last council via a motion. So there is only so many bodies that we have to do the work. You have to decide how best to use those resources.
I think we have our answer there, particularly as it was already agreed in March. So, yes, that's somewhat awkward, isn't it? When will it come back again?
The majority of our major strategies are reviewed every 3 years.
So it won't come back for 3 years.
I suggest then that it's put on the scrutiny agenda in 2 years' time, so that it is looked at before it's the strategy.
So we flag it up, in other words, in good time.
No, we actually put it on the programme now to happen in 2 years' time.
Yeah. I think that would be a very good idea. Very timely. Right, am I still in the right order? Oh, Councillor Thomas. Oh, it's you again. Sustainable drainage systems.
This is sustainable drainage systems on new estates. So there's general dissatisfaction that public infrastructure is paid for by estate charges. Obviously, that's one of the issues here. But the larger concerns really about the adequacy of some of these systems, whether they're being designed properly, whether they're operating properly, and how they're going to be maintained going forward. Really, I think it just needs to be looked at to make sure that through the planning process and whatever other means we have, Rushcliffe is making sure that these are performing as well as they should be, that they're being planned and maintained as they should be, and that their contribution to the environment is being looked at, and their safety and amenity value is assessed, and so on.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to comment on that? Councillor Way?
This is an issue that gets raised quite frequently, again from the newer estates, because it's a bit of an issue when they have to cover the financial burden of these things if they're not working properly. And we've had several examples lately of concerns about one running into another and who's going to pay for it and so on. I have to say that some officers came out to one of our estates recently, and I've heard compliments about how they perceived the problem, understood the problem, and agreed with the resident. I think it's becoming more and more important. And I think one of the reasons that we tend to raise this, Councillor Thomas raises these, is our new estates are older than most other people's new estates. So we're finding these problems ahead of everybody else. And again, it's the open space combined with the open space fees. One thing, though, I did come across the other day is that I don't think people, when they complain about these things, actually understand how they work. because we've had some complaints that they're full of water after it's rained. So we're actually trying to
Your house is
yes,
Oh dear.
impart the information that that's correct, and the other way round is when it's a
You've
problem.
got a problem.
So I think there's a certain amount of communicating with people. But I do think this is again similar to the density one, that it's something to fix these particular areas. And as I say, we're a little bit ahead of the game with these areas. So I think it's something that maybe we should be looking at, whether it be scrutiny or some other way, so that when councillors from other areas come up against these problems, and I'm pretty sure they will at some point, we've already got it sorted and we know what we're talking about.
Very interesting point. Well, I mean, I have to say I've got a great deal of sympathy, having brought the motion that I did, and we've just gone through a dreadful flooding incident, and this is where these systems will actually come into their own, or not, as the case may be. So yes, I've got a great deal of sympathy. Councillor Gowland, I think you indicated.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to think. So I have an even older estate from the 70s. They didn't have a sud, but it had a lot of green space that is totally neglected by the person who now owns it, or the developed company, a famous company locally that now owns it. So yeah, this is probably only going to get worse. It feels to me that these things should not even. Who actually owns them? The developers or this estate management companies? It feels that it should be owned by the council.
It varies, I believe, depending on whether the land has been handed over to a management company or has remained in the hands of the developers. So I think we get a bit of a mixture here. So each one's individual. So there's no consistency. Caris is going to.
Yes, I think that's true, but I think there was a Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act 2010, which you raised in your motion, I believe, Councillor Cumberland. That was, as I understand it, that would have these things adopted publicly. Wales and Scotland, I think, chose to implement it when the Act came into force, but England didn't. And now the government is looking at implementing that Schedule 3, which would bring these into public control, presumably, but perhaps just for the new ones. I think we need an understanding of how the existing ones are working, whether they are working. Just to come back on the fact that people are commenting that they're full, we've also got a lot of them that are completely empty in Eastleigh, which means and a lot of areas that are flooding because the water is never getting into those ponds because they haven't been correctly implemented. So, yeah.
Far be it for me to say, is this an item for scrutiny? But if Rushcliffe don't own or manage them, is this actually anything to do with Rushcliffe?
I think we need to understand what our limitations are and what we can do and what we can't do. And going forward, I think we need to look at our planning processes so that we can
I agree with that, yeah.
do it. So it's not just looking back, it's looking forward, looking at the existing problems and how they can be overcome in future, really.
Tell us the officer's view.
I feel like a bit of a broken record this evening. You may agree that it goes forward to scrutiny. Certainly when I spoke to Leanne Ashmore about this, she very much feels that had Councillor Thomas come forward and asked the questions directly of the planning team, then they would have been answered and she would have had the information that she needed to be happy that what is capable of being done within the Borough Council's remit is actually being done. And it very much comes down to how much control the Borough Council can have in this area. I would also encourage you to consider, if you took this forward to scrutiny, what is the tangible outcome that you are going to get? Where are you going to make a difference that the community will feel?
Isn't the real key point we don't know that yet? And if we don't try, then one thing we are certain of is that nothing will change, will be different. The outcome might be we can't do anything about it, but you know, I feel a need to push back against that. The one thing that I would the one thing that I wonder whether or not, if this is taken forwards, there's really that much benefit in Councillor Thomas's bullet points is how Rushcliffe residents feel they are performing at present. I'm not saying that views of the residents aren't relevant, but I wonder whether it's an appropriate use of time and resource to try to find that out, given the difficulties that we have getting people to engage, even councillors getting to engage with the questions that we ask them. So I don't like that bit, but I like the rest of it.
Quite happy for you to take that one out, Councillor Walker. Will it then get sent to LDF, Chair?
Is it really that much different from, so we take Councillor Thomas's point, they could either be a written response to that she then does what she wants to do with, or they come in the format of a report to a committee meeting, and we spend half an hour scrutinising the outcome of that. Am I missing something on the amount of time or effort, or the difference in outcome between those two approaches?
Yes. There's a huge amount of work involved in presenting items for scrutiny from an officer point of view, both in terms of pulling together the report, pulling together some form of presentation, and attending the meeting and being prepared to answer any questions that you might have. Whereas Leanne sitting down with these questions and just penning out a response for Councillor Thomas is one person's effort, a short amount of time, and it may or may not lead to something. If Councillor Thomas gets her answers, then that is a much shorter way of getting the information.
Can I just... I think I know the answers to quite a lot of these questions. Some of them, they're designed by developers, they're not checked by anyone. Rushcliffe ticks them off because the lead local flood authority ticks them off. Nobody scrutinises them technically in detail. I've been involved with at least one where that I've done that, and it wasn't adequate. There's another one I know of where it hasn't actually been dug in the ground as it was supposed to be in the specifications. And nobody's doing it. I think we know that really, but me understanding that isn't the problem. It's councillors understanding that and collectively coming to some understanding as to what we can be doing collectively to either influence other people to do it properly or to actually undertake responsibilities that are within our remit ourselves. Yes, I can have a discussion with Leanne and bring it back to you in another matrix if you wish. And but you know, there comes a point actually when I'm losing the will to live. So there we go.
Only in that, as Councillor Walker mentioned earlier on, infrastructure delivery was looked at the last meeting. The recommendation coming out of that meeting was that there were certain things within that it raised further questions, and they asked for the officers to bring back a further report at a later stage.
Chair, I sort of feel a bit beholden to speak up on behalf of our committee, who had a look at this 2 meetings ago. Was that July 23? And are requesting to have another look at it next year. It strikes me kind of, so in and of itself, the committee's asked to have a look at it. So I think it's appropriate of us to say, if should we be voting on this, that we, be voting it that it does come back. I suppose aside from that, it's cropping up a lot, isn't it? So yeah, we would ask for this committee's support in us having another look at it again next year, please. Do you mean further than June, July 24 when we've asked for it to be?
I've been having this conversation and no one's been able to hear me. You have? Oh, that's all right.
The avid YouTube readers.
No. I'm sorry about that, YouTube viewers. Sorry, Councillor Way.
Thank you, Chair. I think there were two aspects for this. That partly that the committee asked for it to come back, the scrutiny group asked for it to come back, but also it gave an opportunity for the manager to come back and tell us, give us an update of what was happening. Because for various reasons, as we discussed already today, it was below what the expectation was. And there were all sorts of reasons around that. And I think the opportunity, after a year from the last time we spoke about it. So I mean, it started in April, did it? So looking at it in July, I hadn't given it much chance to develop at that stage. And with all the ideas and the different things that are happening, we thought that after a year, it was a good time to look at it again, because it gave them a chance to build the business and come back with what they'd done and listen to what other ideas people had.
But won't some of this be appearing in performance reports, which is in actual fact what we've been discussing earlier tonight? Councillor Gowan.
And that's fine, because that will make it easy for the officers and the manager, because they'll have produced that information. But this is this is a big expenditure for Rushcliffe. It's potentially a big risk. So I think the chairs, vice chair of the committee are asking for it. The opportunity for everybody to just stand back and review it for what is, presumably not too many days' work for the officers, the managers and the officers, and the committee seems sensible and appropriate, really, given the cost to council.
When would it appear on the performance reports?
So something that we didn't cover when we talked about the corporate strategy earlier on is just how we're going to monitor that moving forward into the new year. So a discussion that we had this morning. So I've revamped the corporate scorecard, the set of indicators that you normally see. Crime is obviously a gap because it didn't exist 4 years ago. So we're currently having a look at what performance indicators they collect and which we need to include in that scorecard. They will start being monitored at a corporate level from the 1st of April next year. So you'll get your first report, your Q1 report, which will come in June, July time. So approximately when we're anticipating this scrutiny coming forward, if you decide to put it on the programme.
On that event, all I was concerned about is doubling up on work. If it's already going to be done for the performance scorecard, I don't want to see an officer having to do twice the work.
I'll just add one more point. I've flicked forward to the proposed work programme for Growth and Development Scrutiny Group. I note that at the moment, March and July next year both have 0 items.
Well, is there a consensus for putting it on the July meeting?
I can't see any reason why not. And I get everything you're saying about the fact that it is ongoing, but it is also a very important thing for the borough. It was a big project, and so it's already they've already had a report in July next year. I think 12 months later, another review, and yes, they'll have an inkling of what's going on, but it's not. Doesn't mean to say that the growth and development shouldn't be looking at it a year down the line. So it seems sensible to me. And go.
Well, in that event, I think we should put it on the July meeting and pray that we don't need to kick it down the road. Right. Let's go to the left. The next one is connectivity and communications, which is in fact a matrix which I've put forward. And as such, I think it should say everything I want to say. As far as I'm concerned, to be able to communicate is absolutely vital in this day and age, and we do seem to be lagging behind. I appreciate this actually is not necessarily a Rushcliffe matter, but we are responsible to our residents for communication, and therefore we would need to invite, I hope, someone from the county council to present. And that basically is all I have to say.
I don't know what percentage of the borough have a 01509 number, but I do, which means that my provision, and Eastleigh does, our provision doesn't come from Nottinghamshire County Council, it comes from Leicestershire County Council. And when I was trying to work out how to get our internet in our village upgraded, or when it was going to happen, because we kept being told that we were going to get fibre to the cabinet, and it happened and everything, it was kicked between. I had discussions with the enabling team at the county council, who said, well, Leicester are dealing with that, and because I lived in Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire had no interest in me whatsoever, albeit they sort of, I was aware that they were actually making improvements. So I'm not quite sure. If you want a presentation from Nottinghamshire County Council, and you almost have to have one from Leicestershire County Council, I'm sure will decline that kind of invitation.
01664 is the same.
Yeah.
Exactly the same.
So it's not something that Nottinghamshire County Council can resolve for quite a large part of the borough.
We therefore need someone from...
I have to say I'm perfectly happy with what I've got now in Willoughby, but I know that some people aren't.
No, we're not.
Thank you. I have personal interest in this because we can't get mobile phone signal when Forest are playing at home particularly well. But once again, I don't quite understand why we would. I don't understand because this isn't a Rushcliffe issue. So we can get the county in to say something about it, but we can't change it directly. Well, we can, but not through this route, as I understand it.
The object of the exercise would be to put pressure on the people who do deliver, and to deliver for the people of Rushcliffe. And that's the object.
Just first of all, this is one of the ones that sent me for a glossary. I had to go and find out and ask somebody what some of these initials meant. But that's aside. What people are saying, I hadn't actually registered the fact that we'd got a non-Nottinghamshire number, and similarly with you. That to me makes it even more important that we get this scrutinised, because we need to bring together the people that are us in the butt to some extent, and make sure that we know exactly what the situation is across the borough, and then be able to tackle the appropriate people in each area. And I think if people are trying to do it on their own, they come up against a lot of problems, whereas if we have the council behind us, we're much more likely to get somewhere, I would have thought. They are upgrading in Leicestershire at the moment, and it just hadn't occurred to me that at all. So thank you for raising that.
But it isn't just Bible we're talking about these things, and that worries me particularly of being a rural borough. The farmer in the field on his own, and something goes wrong, he has an accident, no phone signal. Those sort of things worry me. So I think we need to be looking at what we can do for our Rushcliffe residents, and putting a bum onto the people who should be delivering for us.
The safety issue that you mentioned as well, if people lose their landline connection because the power goes off, that's really something that's of vital importance to people, particularly with the lifelines. I think I read something that they're going to do something new about those. I can't remember where I saw it now.
The landlines are going to be disconnected by 2025. And we'll all have this VoIP system, which I've already got. by default because I complained about something and suddenly they disconnected me. And I said, what? Oh, yeah, wonderful. I was totally disconnected. Oh, great. Yeah, wonderful. So I've now got this computerized system, which is fine, like you say, unless you get a power cut. And then you're stymied.
So what happens to people who rely on that
Precisely.
with the lifeline? Is there some other
Exactly.
provision?
Yeah.
Charlotte's nodding. Yeah.
This is why I think we need to scrutinise it. And we need, yes, we probably need someone from Leicester as well as Nottinghamshire to come and present. Councillor Plant.
Sympathise. Obviously, I don't live in the countryside, but I can't imagine, you know, which officer and the county council will be queuing up to come and be roasted. But and the other thing is that I think that without a doubt this is an issue that should be taken up by the county councillors in the area which you live. I don't know who them. I'm not, you know, criticising. I don't know who they are, what they are, but that is without a doubt their role. I mean, I can remember. God, I'm going. So, keep saying that. Kay Cutts was pushing this years ago at the county. Well, it wasn't not that long ago. And making a great deal of effort to push it out to the rural areas. I don't know what happened to that, but you know, I'm not sure. Well, I am personally don't think it's probably an appropriate thing to be done here. Thanks.
As far as the county coming to talk, that wouldn't be a problem as far as I can see, because they came to talk to Colston Bassett because they have a Nottinghamshire number, and they are having new fibre to the premises as we speak, I think. And I mentioned it to them and they said they would be happy to come and talk. So I don't think that would be a problem. But I do just think it's something that, you know, people of Rushcliffe should be, we should be serving them better. Councillor Walker.
And would it be possible, Chair, to hear from
the officer?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Somewhat cautious now about what I'm being set up for. The officer recommendation, on the basis that Councillor Cumberland came to us and worked with Catherine Evans to create this scrutiny matrix, is that we would recommend that yes, it is something that is passed forward for scrutiny. We have been able to secure somebody from the County Council to come and speak. I didn't realise the issue with Leicestershire either, but we will make similar inquiries there, because it would therefore seem that there is a bit of a postcode lottery here between our different residents. Some are being disadvantaged either because of the area in which they live or the locality, the geographical area and such like. So we don't have a problem putting this on the agenda for future scrutiny.
All right. So, Councillor Eddery?
Just one comment. And again, I absolutely take what you say about mobile phone coverage in the countryside. There are, whoever your service provider is, you can go onto their websites and find out why you've got rubbish service. But and they are supposed to improve it. But again, I think part of the problem with mobile coverage is that they're all private companies. So unless they take the commitment to get that coverage everywhere, and as I'm sure are aware, you'll always get to the top of a mountain in whichever ski resort you go to, but you can't get it in the bottom of a valley in Rushcliffe.
Exactly. So it therefore goes forward scrutiny. Okay. And therefore we've got...
Can I just make one other recommendation? There was a conversation about the relevant county council division ward member potentially coming along. I see no reason why you shouldn't be inviting them to attend from a come and be you know, listen into the conversation, hear about the issues that people in your area have. That would be my one recommendation on that one.
Right. Okay. Right. And now we just look at the.
You have only got 10 minutes left.
I've only got 10 minutes left, and we just want to look at the the work programmes. Do we have any comments on them?
May I just
No.
make a few points? Sorry, just to highlight a few things. So in June next year for the corporate overview group, we're proposing that actually we do an annual update on the strategic tasks. That's a lot more than just your milestones. How far have you got through the process? And this came out of the review that we did at the last corporate strategy, the progress across the 4 years in February at this group. And the idea was to repeat that exercise on an annual basis. So we've put that on the work programme moving forward.
Yep.
Councillor Edivine has already mentioned the asset management plan, which was due to be in November, but has now been moved forward to February. So that is highlighted in green. And the matrices that we have just agreed, we've got connectivity and communications in March, the review of the crematorium in July, and then infrastructure delivery in October, programmed in on those matrices if everybody's happy with those.
Yes. And that actually brings us to the end of our meeting. And if I could say thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for the two councillors who came and spoke to their matrices. Thank you very much. Yes, I look forward to the results of all those.